A super common thing that people who live here ask me is, how can I build an ADU? This may be surprising for you to hear, but the County of Kauai is serious about making it as easy as possible, and it's not that easy, for people who live here to continue to live here, to be able to afford to live on Kauai. And so one of the things they've done, they've tried to create the ability for people who own homes to potentially build housing that would be more affordable for them and for their children. That's kind of the idea. The question we're answering today is, how do you build an ADU on Kauai, an additional dwelling unit? Now we're going to talk a little bit about guest houses and additional rental units as well, but we're mostly talking about ADUs and what is the process. Now, this video was inspired by my friend Heather, who grew up here, and her parents own a small home, and she is trying to figure out, if I had the money to do this, or if I want to be able to do this, like, what are the steps? Sometimes guest house ADUs they can be referred to as ohana units. And these go way back in the state of Hawaii. A handful of years ago, the state of Hawaii passed a law handing over the zoning authority to all the counties. So the counties in Hawaii, which are basically the 4 main islands, have the ability to really enact their own laws in a way that's really, I think, pretty unique and great for people who live in Hawaii and on the island of Kauai. About 2, maybe 3 years ago now, the County of Kauai passed a new law. We copied a law that Maui used. We expanded our guest house size. We went from 500 to 800 square feet. And we wrote the law in a way where guest houses and ADUs are almost exactly the same. One can be replaced with the other, but in this video, we're going to call them ADUs. They updated this law about a year ago to also allow for ADUs on ag land. Before that, the County of Kauai was also serious about ag land being used for ag production. There's not a ton of ag production going on Kauai. Now, there is some, and there's some serious ag production. I mean, we grow a lot of taro here, but most ag land is just beautiful land. You can now build an ADU as well on ag land. These are the types of zoning that will allow for an ADU: agriculture, open, and residential. Now, the new ADU and guest houses can be up to 800 square feet. And it's interesting because they made the kitchen optional. And they made the kitchen optional because in the last revision, where guest homes were 500 square feet, you could not have a kitchen. Now, there were a lot of illegal kitchens that were put in after the fact. But now, just to make it easy for different CPRs and other things, a kitchen in an ADU is optional. Now, most people are going to opt to put one in, but you don't have to. You're going to need to show the county that you have a room for at least one additional parking stall. ADUs can only be used for long-term rentals. Even if you're in a visitor destination, you won't be able to legally use it as a short-term rental. The way the law is written now is any lot that qualifies for a dwelling also qualifies for an ADU. That means you have the right to put both on them, both of those structures on the lot. Now, there are other questions that may prohibit being able to do that, and we'll get into those. One thing that's unique and different between an ADU and an ARU, which is an additional rental unit, is you can, on residentially zoned lots, at some future date, CPR off the ADU and sell the home separately. Now, just because we're talking about it, an ARU, an additional rental unit, is similar to an ADU, but not exactly the same. For example, you can't CPR it off and sell it separately. One of the things that is the same is the max size is 800 square feet. Another difference is that in an ARU, an additional rental unit, a dwelling meant to be rented, you have to have a kitchen. ARUs are only for long-term rentals. And there is a way when you apply for your permit to build an ARU that if you indicate you are going to rent it at a low income rate, there's a lot of savings you can get in permitting. So if that's your intention, make sure you let the county know when you're applying for your permits. When you talk to people like Kiana Hull or other people in development and planning on Kauai, or realtors, one of the big things we talk about, one of the stumbling blocks we have is infrastructure. And one of the big things that limits a lot of this, for good or bad, are sewer systems. We don't have that many sewer systems on Kauai. The large majority of homes have either a cesspool, which is like an ancient septic tank, or a septic tank. And a challenge with these additional dwellings, the ARU, the ADU, or a guest house, is that you're limited to a max of 5 bedrooms, right? So if your main home already has 4 bedrooms, then in your ADU, you're going to be limited to 1 bedroom. So that's something really important to keep in mind. If your lot is big enough, you could potentially have 2 septic tanks, but you need 10,000 square feet lot size for every septic tank. Now, if you have a lot of record, for example, you could have a lot smaller than 10,000 square feet, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000. Every lot of record also has the right to put in a septic tank. If you own a home, it's the house you grew up in, and there's some space in the backyard to build an ADU, you need to make sure the bedroom counts work and make sense for this kind of additional investment. How does it work? You've gone through everything and you're like, hey, our lot size is 12,000 square feet. We only have 3 bedrooms. We could build an ADU. You know, my husband's in the trades. We can do this. This would be a classic example of someone this kind of situation is perfect for. There are 5 departments that have to sign off on your permits. The first thing you want to do is go to the planning department. They're going to look at your property. They're going to ask you for additional information. And generally speaking, they're really helpful. Now, you can go in person or you can give them a call. And their phone number is 808-241-4050. The second department that is going to need to sign off on your permits are the building division or public works. They're the ones that are going to give you your actual permits. Now, the third department, which can be the one that takes the longest to respond, is the water department. As I've mentioned in many videos, you can have a lot that qualifies. You can have everything that qualifies, but you could run into some hurdles. Now, there are ways around these hurdles, but the most common one is you go to the planning department and they say, yes, you qualify, but the pipe at the road is too narrow for another house to be added to it. At some point, we'll get around to it and we'll widen the pipe. Or you can pay and we'll widen the pipe now, right? So that could be an additional fee, and you need to talk to the water department to have any idea of what that would be. And maybe you're lucky, maybe it doesn't apply to you. Maybe there's room for another home. But that is one of the steps, one of the 5 steps in finding out if you can build an ADU on your lot. And the 5th one is the fire department. And the fire department is going to look at it and they're going to say, can we get into this lot easily with our fire truck? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Maybe you're going to need to improve the road if you have an old, country road, or you're part of a larger CPR and it has a road that the fire chief would be concerned that his fire trucks are going to get stuck on because it's too narrow or it's not improved enough. But the fire department is going to be the 5th department that will need to sign off on approving your permit. Here are some other things to know that can help you determine if your property will qualify for an ADU. One thing is lot coverage. Now, this isn't universally true, but most properties on Kauai are allowed to have 50% lot coverage. Open zoning is 10%, and there are other variations. But do you have space to build an additional 800 square feet of lot coverage and still have only 50% lot coverage? That's something to ask yourself. Can you build an ADU and still comply with most setbacks? Now, if you're in a subdivision or a CPR, you could have unique setbacks and you'll want to check your rules and regulations. The county's setbacks currently are 10 feet from the front, 5 feet from the side, and 10 feet from the rear. So with that in mind, you still have room to build an ADU. Now, here are some things that commonly disqualify a property from getting ADU approval. Maybe there's not enough room for an additional parking spot. Insufficient water. They're not going to be able to get enough water there. Another thing that's common on Kauai, we have a lot of unpermitted, not just dwellings, but unpermitted someone made an addition to a home, they didn't get a permit, the county is aware of it, they're not going to issue you a permit to build an ADU until you clear that up. Another thing that could disqualify you is if your property is in the special management area. You can look at a map, you can pull it up, but these are certain areas around Kauai that, because they're so close to the coastline, you're going to have a limited ability to do infill building. Here are some real basic steps to take if you're interested in doing this. First, you're going to want to confirm your zoning. Now, you can look up your own property on the county website, or you can give them a call. Their phone number is 808-241-4050, or you can send them an email, planningdepartment@kauai.gov. So if you're wondering about your property, you can send them an email about your specific property. Another thing that was great to do is you can go online and fill out a clearance form at connect.kauai.gov. You're going to have to create an account, register, put in your property address, and ask if it qualifies for an ADU. Someone's going to take a closer look at it and let you know. You will also need your clearance form to begin the process. When you go, those 5 departments you're going to need to have signed off on, you're going to need to bring your clearance form to all 5 of them. One of the things I loved when preparing for this video was looking at the clearance form. And this is, I'm just going to read it from here because I found it to be so funny and useful. Please, in capital letters, check your deed for restrictions on development before you apply for an ADU. So let me tell you what this means reading between the lines. Your lot can qualify for an ADU according to every law on the county of Kauai, but your subdivision may not allow it. Let me give you an example. Currently on the island of Kauai, or in the county of Kauai, no new subdivisions can be built that will outlaw an ADU. However, lots of subdivisions exist with rules outlawing ADUs. An example of that is Princeville. Right? Princeville is a large housing development on the north shore of Kauai. ADUs, generally speaking, are not allowed. So your property could qualify based on the county. And if it does, the county has to approve. But it may not qualify based on your HOA regulations, which you've agreed to obey. So not only do you want to look at the county, but you also want to probably first start with your neighborhood and your HOA or your CCNRs. Not everyone qualifies for an ADU. Not everyone have parents that would be thrilled to have their son or daughter build an ADU in their backyard or front yard. But I do think it's a great thing that the county of Kauai has done to try to enable people who live here to be able to live here longer, not only with their kids, but also you could do an ARU or rent out your ADU and use that additional income stream to afford to live on Kauai. Now, I'm always saying that on Kauai we have an affordable housing crisis, and we really do. So these are great steps that the county of Kauai has taken to do what they can with the tools they have to make this a little bit easier.